In today's episode, we will be discussing secondary losses and 3 ways to help you cope with it.
Hi, we are Tony and
Jeff
Braybeck, founders of Our Little Sparrows, Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support. If you would like to know more about us and our organization, please click the link in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell to receive alerts when we release new video podcasts every week.
All right, let's get started. What is secondary loss and how does it happen? Grief from the loss of your baby is hard just as it is. What we often don't realize is that other losses are occurring that stem from the primary loss, causing you loads of grief and burdens for you to bear. This is what is referred to as the secondary losses. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the definition specifically? Secondary losses are when a loss impacts many areas of one's life, creating multiple losses stemming from the primary loss itself. Though it is easy to think our grief is solely the grief of losing that one person who died, our grief is also the pain of the other losses caused as a result of that death. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What secondary losses have you experienced after pregnancy loss? Go ahead and put that in the comments below.
Some examples of secondary losses after pregnancy loss are 1. Relationships. You may see that some friendships or relationships may change after your loss. This may be due to others not knowing exactly how to support you, or they don't agree with how you are grieving or that you are grieving at all. Your circle of friends may change, especially with other moms that were expecting at the same time you were. They got their baby and you didn't.
Yeah.
We know that sounds a little bit harsh, but
Right.
it
It's a big
happens.
one, and it's a big one.
It happens, and
Yeah.
the feelings that you experience from that
Pretty raw.
are raw and challenging, to say the least.
Yeah. The second cause of secondary loss would be finances. Financially, if you're strained due to multiple medical bills is huge. I know we had a big bill after we lost Olivia. Another one would be less income due to taking a leave of absence.
Yeah.
I can imagine that's really stressful, especially if it's a single income family.
The third example are religious or spiritual beliefs. This could be a loss of trust in God, or that you're even questioning your own beliefs, whether you believe in God or not.
Right. The fourth example that we have is a loss of self. I think that's probably more prevalent than one might think. A lot of times we have a loss of trust in our own bodies. Obviously, that wouldn't attribute to myself. That attribute more to the moms, really. But I can see how that takes place. Even a loss of identity. I think those two are probably very closely connected.
Yeah.
And then a loss of an ability to concentrate or function.
Yeah.
I know my first experience was a sense of numbness from just being, finding out the diagnosis of the pregnancy with Olivia. And I found it hard to concentrate. I mean, I was out of work for 3 days and then pretty much went back to work, right? I got a lot more time off when we lost Olivia, but going back after 3 days is just like not realistic at all.
So how does one cope with all of these losses, primary and secondary, at the same time? Here are some helpful ways to cope. Tip number 1, acknowledge that secondary losses are a normal part of grief.
Tip number 2, remind yourself that it's okay to grieve all of it. I think another way to say that is don't try to compartmentalize and separate them out. It's too exhausting. I mean, you're exhausted already. So a loss is a loss. We've said this before. There is no comparison. There's no chart. There's no measuring. There's no greater than or less than.
Yeah.
And even though your secondary losses don't involve the death of the loved one themselves, it's still okay to grieve it.
And tip number 3, seek support. Seek the support of family or friends who understand. It can be support from an online support group or an in-person support group. Or you can also seek the support of a professional.
And in a previous episode, we actually talked about support systems, and we had a downloadable reference, a guide for online support, in-person support. We had various different support opportunities and options. So we'll put a link in the card above, so you can reference that episode. And in that episode, in the description, you can find the link to download the guide for support. So we often don't realize that we're experiencing this secondary loss or secondary losses that we're talking about. So we wonder why grief is so hard. It's because we are dealing with multiple losses in a short time, which can compound our grief, whether we are cognitive of that, whether we realize it, or if it's lying under the surface and we just haven't figured out why. It's there. So it's important to recognize when this is occurring in your life and seek additional support for yourself and your family. And I've said this a lot before. It really starts with just a conversation, being willing to be vulnerable. I think that's a key point. We hope that you found this episode helpful, and we want you to know, as always, that you are not alone. You are loved, and your baby will always be cherished. And we're here to support you in any way that we can.
If you got value out of this episode, please give us a thumbs up so others can find it. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell to get updates for when we release new content weekly. If you liked this episode and want to see another video podcast, click or tap here. If you are looking for more in-depth information, we have a grief series called The Pregnancy Journey, Grieving from Diagnosis to the Loss of Your Baby and Beyond. You can click or tap here.
Perfect.